The following podcast is an exclusive presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Hey folks, Brian Keene here. Before we start the show, I want to take a moment to address you personally. Now, I know we have all kinds of folks who listen to this podcast every week, and some of you want to be writers, but you don't know where to start. You're working, you go to the job all day, and then you get home, and you don't have the time or the money to go to college, right? Wrong. Let me tell you about the National University Online's MFA program. Since 2005, it has helped people exactly like you, working adults, learn the craft of creative writing. What's better? They don't turn their nose up at horror. They're genre fiction friendly. Horror, science fiction, fantasy, young adult, you name it, they'll teach you. You can work with faculty like Lee Thomas and John Coyne. If you listen to the show, you should know who they are. But yeah, horror, sci-fi faculty, they focus in fiction, creative nonfiction, poetry, or screenwriting. The screenwriting faculty are all active Hollywood professionals. I mean, this is an alumni network of over 1,000 graduates. And as I said, National University MFA program is fully online. It's a creative writing program with no residency requirement. They are an accredited, not-for-profit university. Find out all the details at nu.edu. That's www.nu.edu, the National University MFA Creative Writing Program.
Prismatic Words by Lucas Millian. 12 stories of the beautifully macabre, from cosmic terrors such as Force of Nature and The Initiated to the gross and comedic chunky and the somber dread of Orca. Prismatic Words runs the gamut of Millian's unique style of horror. Each tale reflects the aura of emotions its story hopes to convey in a unique paperback experience. Come see Lucas Millian at this year's Scares the Care charity convention in Williamsburg, Virginia, August 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, where he will be selling 60 limited edition color copies of Prismatic Words. For a sample of his work, listen to his live reading of My Friend in the Dark at Scares on Friday night at 9:15 p.m. Prismatic Words, available exclusively in paperback on Amazon. The eyes are the window to the soul. Come look inside.
There shall come a podcast like no other. Defenders Dialogue with Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Marvel Comics' original superhero non-team convenes once again. The Incredible Hulk, the Savage Submariner, the Master of the Mystic Arts, Doctor Strange, and a dynamic supporting cast of Marvel superheroes battle against evil as the Defenders. Without further ado, true believers, here's your hosts, Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Excelsior!
And welcome back once again, true believers, to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene, solo this week without Christopher Golden, but if Chris was here, he would give you a hearty Excelsior, true believers. Chris will be back in 2 weeks as we talk about the champions. He is very excited for that, but he's on family vacation for the next 2 weeks, so you are stuck with me. This week, we're going to talk about Defenders Indefensible. Next week, we're going to talk about some of the other iterations of the Defenders over the years. If you're a longtime listener, then you know that our focus on this show is specifically the Bronze Age of Marvel Comics. That is the 1970s, the 1980s, basically everything up to Secret Wars 2. That's our cutoff date. So if it took place before then, we will cover it in depth. Occasionally, we will break the rules, as we're going to do today with Defenders Indefensible. The reason we're going to cover it, but not necessarily all of the other iterations of the Defenders in detail, several reasons. First of all, it's one of my favorite takes on the Defenders. Second of all, it's the creative team involved. First of all, we have J.M. DeMatteis. Now, if you're a listener of this show, you've heard the man himself, an integral part of the Defenders. His run is, alongside Steve Gerber, is considered the seminal take. Not to mention he did things with Devil Slayer and Son of Satan and, of course, his creation, the Gargoyle, that are just iconic parts of Defenders lore. Coming with him is my dear friend Keith Giffen. Keith, again, no stranger to the Defenders. He illustrated the book back in the 70s. It was one of his first comics gigs, actually. I know in talking with him, he says that was his early Kirby phase, where he was still very much, of course, influenced by Jack Kirby. And then he got back into that again a few years ago with OMAC that he did with Dan Didio for DC, and of course something he and I wrote together, Masters of the Universe: Origins of Hordak. When we did that together, he said it was just going to be a giant ode to Kirby, and sure enough, it was. And they bring with them their good friend Kevin Maguire. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time Kevin worked on the Defenders, but it is not the first time he worked with DeMatteis and Giffen. The three of them had one of the most fan favorite comic book runs in the history of the medium. I am, of course, talking about Justice League and Justice League International for DC Comics, what some fans refer to as the Bwahaha era, where Batman lays out Guy Gardner with one punch. Maguire's art is so distinctive. And because there are so many comedic elements, I mean, there's pathos, there's drama, there's action, but DeMatteis and Giffen together, there's so much humor that they inject into the superhero tropes, and Maguire's art it suits that very well. I liken him to Steve Dillon, another one of my favorite comic artists of all time. Steve Dillon, of course, you probably know him best for his collaborations with Garth Ennis, Preacher, the long-running Preacher, their run on Punisher. So yeah, we have DeMatteis, Giffen, and Maguire on the Defenders, Indefensible. There were other versions of the Defenders between the last issue that we covered and the series that I'm going to cover right now. As I said, we'll get to them next week. Some of them worked very well. Some of them did not work at all. And I'll be very honest about those iterations next week. Because Chris isn't here, I'm going to skip the page by page, go through, and I'm just going to talk about my impressions of Indefensible. And hopefully you've read along at home. If not, pick it up and read it. Marvel has collected it in hardcover. They've collected it in trade paperback. I believe it's available digitally. There's all kinds of ways you can read this. And the back issues are very inexpensive. I think my local store has them for $2 each. So anyway, we open with Doctor Strange, and we find out that Wong has been possessed by the demon known as Nightmare. Now, Nightmare has not appeared in the Defenders. Wong certainly has. And right away, Giffen and DeMatteis do what they do best. Using humor, they deconstruct Stephen Strange's relationship with Wong. Remember, he refers to Wong as his manservant. Now, this was done in, when was it here? 2005 and 2006. We were growing as a society, but I don't think we were as socially aware as we are now. But already, here's Giffen and DeMatteis, using the bad guy to point out to Doctor Strange that, hey, maybe it's not cool to call this guy your manservant. Once again, hearkening back to what we've talked about since the very first episode of the show. Doctor Strange can kind of be a dick at times. Anyway, Nightmare tells Doctor Strange that the dread Dormammu, who we've seen in the Defenders, of course, and his sister Umar are about to take over the Earth. And Nightmare is telling Doctor Strange this because Dormammu has outlawed dreaming, and if he outlaws dreaming, then on Earth, then there's nothing for Nightmare to do. So Nightmare decides Doctor Strange decides he's going to have to get the band back together. So he does what he's done since the Defenders' very first appearance. He astrally projects to his teammates. First, he comes across Bruce, and here's a great example of the humor that DeMatteis and and Giffen use. You have Bruce Banner walking through the desert, and Doctor Strange's ghost appears before him and says, "How many years, Bruce, have you lived like this? A hunted animal, bereft of all purpose, save survival." And Bruce says, "And how many years have you been speaking like an actor in a low-rent Shakespeare festival? I don't know if anyone's ever mentioned this to you before, but real people don't talk like that." And this is an ongoing bit throughout the book because Nightmare has pointed it out to Doctor Strange previously to this. Once again, driving the point home, Doctor Strange is kind of a dick. So anyway, he tells Bruce, "Hey, the universe is in trouble again. This time it's Dormammu. Only the Defenders can stop it." And Bruce tells him to fuck off. He's had it with the Defenders. He's not doing this again. And, he Doctor Strange, he tells him, he says, "Perhaps once I could just twitch my nose and make this problem disappear, but not now. I need you. I need the Hulk." And Bruce says, "Pretty good speech, but as you may have noticed, I'm a hunted man and the Hulk draws attention." And he tells him no. And Doctor Strange watches him walk away, and then Bruce stops, shoulders slumped, and he turns around and he says, "Just for the record, you totally guilted me into this." And Doctor Strange says, "Of course, I know that for some purists, they don't care for this take on the Defenders. They don't like the comedy." Well, first of all, what book were you reading back in the 70s? The Defenders always had comedy. You look at the Headmen saga. You look at the Elf with a Gun, the absurdity of that. You look at DeMatteis' Dr. Seuss ode that we've covered. The Defenders have always had comedy. For me, I think this is a true iteration of the Defenders because it gets down to the core of these characters. No, these three don't like each other, and yet they don't really have anybody else. Bruce, even though he's completely against it, he ends up going with Doctor Strange, which means it's time for the next Defender, and that is, of course, Prince Namor, the Submariner. And same thing happens. Namor tells Strange, "I am not your friend. I don't like you. I'm not coming with you." And Doctor Strange knows the Submariner, and he knows how to appeal to him. He says, "I've known you long enough and well enough to understand that beneath that rude and arrogant exterior lies an even ruder and more arrogant interior. But in all things, Namor, you are an honest and honorable man. See you at the Sanctum." And Namor says, "You will not." And Doctor Strange says, "Of course I will," as he fades out. And Namor says, "He calls me arrogant." But of course, Namor does show up at the Sanctum Sanctorum. And when he does, Wong asks Doctor Strange, he's like, "Did you also reach out to the Silver Surfer?" And Doctor Strange says, "Yes, but, he doesn't want to talk about it." And hearkening all the way back to those early issues of Marvel Feature and the Defenders, Giffen and DeMatteis, they have Hulk and Namor bickering with each other, and Maguire's artwork really makes this sing. When I post this episode to YouTube, I'm going to include it here. Banner tells Namor, "I've been meaning to ask you, did you ever actually find Nemo, or are you still looking?" And there's this panel of silence where Namor's wagging his finger in Bruce's face. And then he says, "If I knew what that meant, I would kill you where you stand." It's just note perfect, these two, the way they get it. So anyway, one thing leads to another. Namor backhands Banner. Banner turns into the Hulk. And Doctor Strange teleports them to the dimension of the dread Dormammu. Fighting takes place. We also find out why the Silver Surfer is not with them. We get a flashback to a subplot where the Surfer refuses Strange's call because he has decided to hang out with actual surfers in Hawaii. He thinks that they will teach him the mysteries of the universe. This subplot continues throughout the entire series. It goes nowhere. It's hilarious. So I'm not going to bring it up again, other than that's what's going on with the Surfer. Again, I'm not going to do a blow-by-blow of the next few issues. The book is, of course, notable in that to the best of our knowledge, it's the only Marvel comic that actually shows the Hulk getting laid. Umar captures the Hulk. Hulk gets laid, and of course, he's so relaxed afterward that he turns back into Bruce Banner. And Umar wants him to transform back into the Hulk so she can get laid again, and Banner can't. He's so ultimately relaxed that he does not, in fact, turn into the Hulk until the final issue again of the series. It is notable for that. I know in today's day and age, some folks may take issue with that. I would stress that you actually read the book and read it in the manner it's presented and the intent. It's a funny bit. And guess what? Superheroes fuck just like people do. None of it is against anybody's consent. It's all consensual. I personally was happy to see the Hulk get laid. I mean, the guy spends his life running through the desert with people firing missiles at him. It was nice of that to happen. But yeah, at the end of the book, it's exactly what I said. They learn that while they may not have anyone else, they have each other. Of course, they defeat Dormammu. They encounter their dark doppelgangers. But I in closing here, I wanna read to you what Bruce says to Strange. He says, look, the fact is, guys like us really don't have friends. We're loners, and fairly unlikable loners at that. But every once in a while, I need someone to just, sit down and talk to. And Dr. Strange says, and that would be me? And Bruce says, I guess so. And Dr. Strange says, well, come on then. I've got to change of clothes at the Sanctum. That sums up these characters in a nutshell. If Chris was here, he'd say it too. Standing ovation, Mr. DeMatteis, Mr. Giffen, and Mr. Maguire. So that's it for this week. I know it's a short episode, but, I can't go on for an hour like I do when it's Chris and I on the air. But that's it for this week. Next week, as I said, I will go over the other incarnations of the Defenders. We'll talk about the good and the bad in that. Until next week, if you enjoyed this show, a couple other things you may enjoy. First of all, the Horror Show with Brian Keene. That's a show I host every week. If I sound distracted, it's because Dungeon Master and his friend just crept through the living room, but they're being very good and very quiet, allowing me to finish this recording. Yes, the Horror Show with Brian Keene. I host that every week with Mary Sangiovanni, Dave Thomas, and Matt Wilderson. We interview the biggest names in the horror genre: actors, authors, directors, etc. And of course, you may enjoy Three Guys with Beards. That's a show that Chris hosts every week with Jonathan Mayberry and Jim Moore. And spoiler warning, there are about to be some permanent changes to Three Guys with Beards, but I will let Chris tell you about that when he's back here. Of course, those shows and Defenders Dialogue are available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play Music, YouTube, and all other platforms via the Project Entertainment Network. If you would like to sponsor the show, just go to projectentertainmentnetwork.com, click Contact, and tell them you'd like to buy an ad. While you're there, you can also buy Defenders Dialogue, coffee mugs, T-shirts, bumper stickers, and all kinds of other stuff. Until next week, folks, Excelsior and bye.
You're listening to American Top 40. More tragedy in the news today. Kim Kardashian has a new baby. What the hell? There's nothing good to listen to. Hey, wait, what's this?
Anything noisy. You gotta roll that out.
See, it makes me do weird things. I don't like it.
God damn it.
I'd be going down on myself?
Shit.
Hey guys, it's Bill,
Mick,
Maya.
and Junior.
from the Unsupervised Podcast.
Check us out every Thursday on the Project Entertainment Network.
Take a break from the stress of the world and come have a laugh with or at us.
Bill.
Thank you for coming to the Project Entertainment Network store. Please place your order. A good choice. A t-shirt for the Horror Show with Brian Keene. Amanda Method coffee mug. There's more. A Necrocast on hoodie. That's sharp. But why on earth would you want Bizong leggings? Wait. Are you Mr. Frank? The Project Entertainment Network store, stacked with goodies from all your favorite podcasts. T-shirts, hoodies, mugs and more. www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
My Favorite Story, a podcast author anthology featuring short fiction from the hosts of the Project Entertainment Network shows.
Three guys with beards: Jim Moore, Jonathan Maybar, and Chris Golden.
Tom Clark from Necrocast on.
Brian Keene of The Horror Show.
Chuck Buda, and Armand Rosamilia of the Mando Method.
Mary San Giovanni of Cosmic Shenanigans.
Jay Wilburn from Matters of Faith.
John Urbansick of Ink Stains.
Biz Ung's Mr. Frank.
Available on Kindle and in paperback and through the Project Entertainment Network store.
www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
This has been an exclusive presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.